Hello everyone, and welcome to the solution for the balanced parentheses check interview problem. Just as a reminder, this is a pretty common interview problem, and it's one of the main ways to check your knowledge of stacks. So, what the problem statement was, you were given a string of opening and closing parentheses, and you had to check whether it was balanced. Let's go ahead and go over some logic for our solution. Let me go ahead and zoom in here. So, as I mentioned, this is a common interview problem, and we're going to start our solution logic as such. Starting with this step, first, we're going to scan the string from left to right, and every time we see an opening parentheses, we're going to push it to a stack, because we want the last opening parentheses to be closed first. So remember that first in, last out structure of a stack. And that first in, last out is just another way of saying last in, first out. Okay. So the second step is going to be when we see a closing parentheses, we're going to check whether the last opened one is the corresponding closing match by popping an element from the stack. If it's a valid match, then we can proceed forward. Otherwise, we just return false because we know it's not balanced. So, if the stack is empty, we'll also return false because there's no opening parentheses associated with the closing one. And in the end, we also check whether the stack is empty. If so, we just return true. Otherwise, we return false because there were some open parentheses that were not closed. So that's our basic logic written out. Let's go ahead and code out the solution for this so we can see this implemented in action. Alright, so I'm going to go ahead and fill out that balance check function. It takes in a string. And first thing we're going to do is just a quick edge case check. So we can already check that if there's an even number of brackets, we know we can continue on with the solution. Otherwise, if there's an odd number of brackets, we'll just return false since that's going to be an impossible string to balance. So I'll say if the length of that string, s, mod 2 is not equal to 0, then I know we have an odd number of parentheses and I can just return false. Keep in mind that we were given the statement that there's no spaces or words or elements besides parentheses here. Otherwise, you wouldn't be able to do such an easy check. Next thing we're going to do is create a set of opening brackets. So I'm going to create a variable called opening, and I'll make a set, and I can pass in a string to this set, and I just want the opening brackets. You'll notice that Jupyter Notebooks and IPython in general will auto-generate the closed brackets. Don't worry about that right now. So just to show you what this line is actually doing, I'm just going to actually run it here so you can see. It's basically a nice quick way of creating a set of these brackets individually. So it's taking each element in that string and passing it into the set. Alright, so we have our opening brackets. Let me go ahead and delete this. So we have that opening set of brackets. Let's go ahead and make a set of the matching pairs. So I'm going to make another set. I'll call it matches. And I'm going to pass in a list here of tuples of the matches. So we have 3 types of parentheses, which means I'm going to have 3 tuples. I'm setting them up here so hopefully you can see the logic that we're doing. So let's go ahead and make the first match. That first match would be an opening and a closing parentheses. So note how that's our first tuple here. Let me space this out so it's a little more clear. So that's our first basic tuple set or pair. And next one's going to be the square brackets. So there's the open square bracket and there's the closed square bracket. And then let's go ahead and do the curly one. So curly open and curly closed. Okay, let me go ahead and make sure you guys understand what this is by just running that string, or excuse me, running that line. And you'll notice we have our set, and it's of tuple pairs here. Open, closed, open, closed, open, closed. All right, so that variable is called matches. And what we're going to do is use a list as a stack. So remember when we were implementing our stack, we were basically using all the built-in operations of a list. So that's totally fine in an interview setting. Just make sure your interviewer knows that you realize a Python list can operate the same as a stack in this situation. Maybe as an earlier question, they asked you to implement your own stack, so you might want to keep this in mind. And a good challenge would be to implement your own stack first, and then do this problem with your own implemented stack class. So, continuing on, let's go ahead and check every parentheses in the string. So I'm going to say for paren, short for parentheses, in s, that string we took in. What I want to do is check if it's an opening, I'm going to append it to that list. Basically push it to the stack. So I'm going to say if paren is in opening, meaning it's an opening parentheses, going to take my stack, which was that list, and append that paren. So I'm pushing that parentheses if it's an opening one. Else what I'm going to do is check that there are parentheses in the stack. So if it's not an opening parentheses, it means it's a closing one. So the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to say if length of stack, put that in there. If length of stack is equal to 0, return false. Because I already know there wasn't a matching opening parentheses for that closing parentheses if the length of the stack is already 0. If that's not the case, what I want to do is check that last open parentheses. So I'm going to create a variable, call it last open, and that will be that pop from the stack. Remember our first in, last out, or last in, first out principle. And what I want to do now is check if that has a closing match. So I'll say if last open paren is not in matches, return false. So hopefully now you can see why we did that tuple set here of these pairings, so I can use this sort of notation, last open paren not in matches. There's definitely other ways you could have gone about making this check, but I like this because it's a little cleaner and it makes a nice use of a set as a one line here for checking your matches. Okay, so if none of those ended up returning anything, then I'm just going to do a quick check if the stack is empty. So I'm going to say return length of stack equal to 0. And let me go ahead and zoom out a bit so you can see how the code is laid out. Alright, so you can see that this 4 lines up with that return for that check if we've emptied out that stack completely. So let's go ahead and do some balance checks and make sure this all works out and check if we have any errors in our code. Okay, so it looks like this one's true. Makes sense to me. Let's check another balance check. This one should also be true. Alright, and now let's check one that we know is false. Great, and we got false. Alright, that's all there is to this solution. So let's go ahead and see it one more time and walk through the steps we're doing. So remember, the first thing we're doing is we're just scanning the string from left to right, which is what this for loop is doing. And then every time we see an opening parentheses, we push it to the stack. So we created our opening set of parentheses, and we're saying if paren is in the opening, I'm going to push it to that stack. And in this case, since my stack is just a list, I'm using the append method of that list. Alright, we do this because we want the last opening parentheses to be closed first. Then, when we see a closing parentheses, we're going to check whether the last opened one is the corresponding closing match by popping an element from the stack, which is right here in this case. If it's a valid match, then we proceed forward. If not, we're going to return false. Another method or step here is that if the stack is empty, we're also going to return false because there's no opening parentheses associated with that closing one, which is what we did here in this check. So in the end, we'll also check whether the stack is empty right here. If so, we'll end up returning true because that means we've balanced out and matched all the parentheses. Otherwise, we return false because there were some open parentheses that were never closed at the end of going through the entire string. Okay, so go ahead and walk through that solution, make sure you understand it. Go ahead and see if you can implement your own stat class and use it in the same way as we did with our list as a substitute. And if you want, you can go ahead and check out other methods or create your own methods for doing this check right here of the matches with this line. Okay, that's the solution, everyone. Thanks a lot, and I'll see you at the next lecture. Thanks.